The restaurant was almost silent, the kind of silence that only comes after a long day of clattering dishes, hurried footsteps, and endless chatter of hungry customers. The golden lamps hanging from the ceiling cast warm circles of light across the booths, reflecting softly against the polished wooden panels. It was late, far later than usual. Adrian Cole loosened the knot of his tie as he stepped inside. To anyone watching, he looked like just another businessman finishing a long day. The navy blue suit, the neatly combed hair, the sharp expression. Everything about him spoke of power and confidence. But what no one here knew was that Adrian wasn't just a businessman. He was the secret owner of this very restaurant chain, Cole's Dining, one of the fastest-growing franchises in the city. Adrian had built an empire from scratch, yet he had learned long ago that when you showed up as the CEO, people acted differently around you. Employees smiled a little too hard, managers hovered nervously, and the truth about how things really worked stayed hidden. That's why he had started doing these undercover visits. He'd walk in unannounced, blending into the background, to see the reality of his business with his own eyes. Tonight was one of those nights. The dining hall should have been empty, but as Adrian walked further inside, his eyes caught a surprising sight. In the far booth by the wall, a young woman had fallen asleep, her head resting against her arm on the table. A loose strand of blonde hair framed her face, rising and falling gently with each breath. She was still in her waitress uniform. A white blouse, sleeves rolled up, and a faded red skirt. A crumpled napkin lay beside her hand as if she'd been too exhausted to put it away. Adrian stopped. Something about the image struck him, the stillness, the vulnerability. Most employees had already left, yet she was still here, too tired to even make it home. He glanced around. The manager's office door was shut. The kitchen lights were off. Everyone else was gone. It was just her. And him. For a moment, Adrian considered waking her gently. But then he noticed the dark circles beneath her eyes, the faint smudge of flour on her sleeve, and the way her fingers twitched like she'd been carrying trays all day. She worked herself to exhaustion, he thought. Adrian sat down quietly at the booth across from her, studying her face. She was young, probably in her early 20s. Too young to look this tired. There was a kind of innocence about her, but also a hidden strength, like someone who had learned to fight life's battles without complaint. Suddenly, the girl stirred. Her lashes fluttered, and she blinked slowly, realizing someone was there. Her eyes widened, and she sat up quickly, embarrassed. I'm sorry, she stammered, brushing her hair back nervously. I didn't mean to fall asleep here. I'll leave right away. Adrian raised a hand calmly. It's all right. You don't have to rush. Long day. She hesitated, clearly wary of him. To her, he was just a sharply dressed stranger who had no business being here this late. Yeah, very long, she said softly. I just finished the closing shift. Guess I didn't realize how tired I was. He smiled faintly. Looks like you worked harder than everyone else. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. That's usually how it goes. There was something in her tone. A quiet acceptance, not bitterness. She wasn't complaining, just stating a fact. Adrian leaned forward slightly. What's your name? She looked at him cautiously, as if debating whether to answer. Finally, she said, Claire. Claire, he repeated, testing the name. Suited her, simple, unpretentious, yet strong. And you? She asked politely, though her voice carried a note of curiosity. Adrian hesitated for a second. He couldn't just say, I'm Adrian Cole, the man who owns this place and a dozen others like it. That would ruin everything. Adrian, he said simply. Just Adrian. Claire nodded, clearly too tired to question further. She rubbed her eyes. I'm sorry again for... Sleeping here. I hope I didn't disturb you." "Not at all," Adrian replied. "Actually, I was impressed. It's rare to see someone so dedicated they work themselves to exhaustion." She gave a small laugh, though it held no real humor. "Dedicated or desperate? Sometimes I wonder which one I am." Adrian's expression softened. "Desperate?" Claire hesitated. For a moment she looked like she might not answer. But then, perhaps because she saw no judgment in his eyes, the words slipped out. "I just really need this job. It's not much, but it helps me keep a roof over my head. Rent, bills, you know how it is." She shrugged, trying to sound casual, but there was a raw honesty in her voice. Adrian studied her carefully. She was too young to be carrying burdens this heavy. But he didn't press. He knew if he asked too much, she'd shut down. Instead, he leaned back. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're doing better than you realize. Most people wouldn't even push themselves this far." Her eyes softened slightly at his words. It was as if she wasn't used to hearing encouragement. "Thanks," she whispered. Silence settled between them for a few seconds. Outside, the city hummed with distant traffic. Inside, the restaurant felt like its own little world. Two strangers caught in an unexpected moment. Finally, Claire stood, brushing down her skirt. "I should go. If the manager finds me still here tomorrow morning, he'll probably fire me." Adrian's brow furrowed slightly. "He wouldn't fire you just for that, would he?" She let out a humorless laugh. "You don't know Mr. Dalton. He's not the most understanding boss." Adrian's jaw tightened at the name. He knew Dalton, the manager of this branch. Adrian had hired him years ago, back when the franchise was small. Lately, though, he'd heard whispers that Dalton had grown lazy, even harsh with employees. Adrian hadn't wanted to believe it, but now he was hearing it directly from someone living it. Claire picked up her small bag and slung it over her shoulder. "Anyway, thanks for letting me sit for a while. You're kinder than most people I meet here." Adrian felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. "And you're stronger than most people I meet anywhere." She froze at his words, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. There was something in his tone, genuine, unwavering, that made her cheeks flush slightly. She didn't know why, but this stranger's words carried weight. Without another word, she gave him a small nod and walked toward the door. Adrian watched her go, his thoughts racing. He had come here tonight to check on his restaurant, to see how things were running behind the scenes. Instead, he had discovered something else, someone else. Claire. And for the first time in a long while, Adrian felt something stir inside him. Curiosity, admiration, maybe even a spark of hope. As the door closed behind her, Adrian made a silent decision. This wasn't the last time he would see her. This was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the glass windows of the restaurant. The city outside was already alive with honking cars, hurried footsteps, and the aroma of bakeries opening for the day. But inside Cole's dining, the staff moved like clockwork, setting tables, polishing glasses, and preparing for the morning rush. Adrian entered quietly. This time, instead of his usual expensive tie, he wore a plain shirt and dark jeans. He needed to blend in, to observe without drawing attention. Nobody knew who he really was here, not even the manager. As he walked toward a corner booth, he caught sight of her. Claire. She was already on her feet, carrying a tray with 3 cups of steaming coffee balanced perfectly. Her hair was neatly tied back, though a few loose strands escaped to frame her face. Despite the fatigue Adrian had seen last night, she wore a polite smile, greeting customers with warmth. But Adrian noticed something others might miss. The smile never reached her eyes. When she placed the coffee on a table, she bowed her head slightly. "Enjoy your meal," she said softly before turning away. The couple she served barely acknowledged her. Adrian felt a strange tug inside. He'd met countless people in his life. Investors, entrepreneurs, executives who pretended to care about the world but only cared about profits. Yet here was a young woman, invisible to most, carrying the weight of her life quietly. He wasn't sure why, but he wanted to know more. The chance came sooner than he expected. Around noon, the manager, Dalton, stormed out of the back office. He was a heavy-set man in his 40s, with thinning hair and a permanent scowl carved into his face. His voice echoed across the restaurant. "Claire, Table 7 has been waiting for their order for 10 minutes. What are you doing?" Claire froze, tray in hand. I just gave it to the kitchen, sir. They said it'll be ready in a moment." Dalton glared at her. "Excuses? Do you want me to lose customers? Do your job properly? Or don't bother showing up tomorrow." The restaurant went silent for a second. A few customers looked over, whispering. Claire's cheeks flushed with humiliation, but she bit her lip and nodded. "Yes, sir." Adrian's fists clenched under the table. He forced himself to stay calm, but anger boiled inside him. Dalton wasn't just strict, he was cruel. And if this was how he treated his employees in front of customers, Adrian could only imagine what happened behind closed doors. Claire returned to work, her movements brisk, efficient. But Adrian noticed the slight tremor in her hands. She was holding it all in. A few hours later, the lunch rush slowed. Adrian watched as Claire disappeared into the break room. He followed discreetly, pausing near the door. Inside, she sat at a small metal table, unwrapping a simple sandwich from a paper bag. She ate quickly, almost mechanically, as if food was just fuel and nothing more. After a few bites, she pulled out her phone. Adrian couldn't see the screen, but he heard her voice, soft, tired, yet gentle. "Hey, sweetie, did you eat already?" "Oh good. I'm glad. Mommy will be home late again tonight, but I promise we'll read your favorite story before bed." "Okay." Adrian froze. She had a child. Her tone shifted, full of love and reassurance. But when she hung up, her shoulders sagged. She pressed her forehead against her hands for a moment, as if fighting to stay strong. Something inside Adrian shifted. Claire wasn't just a hard-working waitress. She was a mother fighting for survival. That explained the exhaustion, the desperation, the reason she couldn't afford to lose this job. Later that evening, when most customers had gone, Adrian caught her near the counter. "Hey," he said softly. She turned, surprised. "Oh, you again. Adrian, right?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I figured I'd stop by for lunch." Her lips curved in the slightest smile. "Hope the food was good." "It was," he said honestly. "But that's not what caught my attention." She tilted her head, confused. "You did," he admitted. Her cheeks warmed, but she looked away quickly. "Why? I'm just a waitress." Adrian leaned closer, his voice gentle. "No, Claire, you're not just anything. You're someone working harder than most people I've ever met. And you deserve more credit than you get." For a moment, her eyes glistened, as if his words had touched something she'd buried deep. But then she forced a small laugh. "If you keep saying things like that, I might actually start believing them." "Maybe you should," Adrian replied. That night, when Claire thought everyone had left, she once again sat down in the booth, resting her head against the table. Exhaustion overtook her like a wave. Adrian stood at a distance, watching silently. His heart ached. She had no idea the man standing a few feet away wasn't just some stranger. He was the man who had the power to change her entire life. But Adrian knew he couldn't reveal the truth yet. Not now. If he told her he was the millionaire CEO who owned this place, she'd look at him differently. She'd put up walls, think he pitted her. No. He wanted her to see him for who he was, not for his money. So, for now he stayed silent. But deep inside he made himself a promise. He would protect her. He would uncover the truth of what she faced in this restaurant. And one day, he would show her the life she deserved. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was personal. The rain tapped softly against the city streets that evening. Streetlights glowed like halos in the mist, and the world seemed slower, quieter. But inside Claire's small apartment, life was anything but easy. The space was tiny. A single bedroom, a worn couch that doubled as a bed, and a kitchenette barely big enough for one person to stand in. The walls carried faint cracks, and the carpet had long lost its color. Yet, despite everything, the apartment carried warmth. In the corner, a little boy sat cross-legged on the floor, his tiny hands moving toy cars across a faded rug. His laughter filled the room when Claire, still in her waitress uniform, joined him on the floor. "Virum, watch out," she said playfully, crashing her car into his. "Mommy, you lost again." The boy giggled, his eyes shining with mischief. Claire smiled, her exhaustion melting away for that brief moment. "I always lose when you're the driver, Jamie." Jamie, her son, barely 6 years old, yet the center of her universe. After dinner, just a bowl of noodles and some bread, Claire tucked him into bed. She pulled out a worn children's book, its pages creased from countless nights of reading. "Can we read The Dragon one again?" Jamie asked, snuggling under the blanket. Claire nodded, her voice soft as she began the story. But halfway through, her voice cracked. She quickly looked away, blinking back tears. Jamie noticed. "Mommy, are you sad?" She forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Just tired." "Don't worry." When he finally drifted to sleep, Claire sat quietly at the edge of his bed, brushing his hair gently. Her heart ached with love, but also with fear. Every day was a battle, working long shifts, dealing with Dalton's cruelty, and praying she could hold on to this fragile life she had built for her son. She couldn't afford mistakes. She couldn't afford to be weak. Meanwhile, across town, Adrian sat in his penthouse suite, an entirely different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the glittering skyline. His home was filled with everything money could buy: luxury furniture, fine art, state-of-the-art technology. Yet tonight it all felt empty. His thoughts kept circling back to her. Claire. He remembered her smile at work, the way it tried to mask her exhaustion. He remembered the softness in her voice when she spoke on the phone. He hadn't heard the words clearly, but he knew it had been her son. And he remembered Dalton's public humiliation of her. Adrian's jaw tightened. He had built this company on values his father had taught him: respect, dignity, and hard work. If employees were being treated like this in his restaurants, then he was failing. But there was more. Claire wasn't just an employee. She was a person whose story pulled at something deep inside him. He wanted to know her truth, every piece of it. The next day, he returned undercover. The lunch rush had just ended when Adrian noticed something suspicious. Claire was in the kitchen, picking up plates, when Dalton cornered her. "You think customers come here to see you smile?" Dalton sneered. "No, they come for the food. So stop wasting time chatting and focus on moving those trays faster." Claire kept her head low. "Yes, sir." "And another thing." Dalton leaned closer, lowering his voice but not enough to escape Adrian's ears. "You're lucky I even keep you on staff. Plenty of girls out there would take this job for half the pay. So remember, if you slip, I can replace you in a heartbeat." Adrian's blood boiled. He forced himself to stay seated, fists clenched under the table. Revealing his identity now would ruin everything. But he had heard enough. Dalton wasn't just strict, He was abusive, exploiting his position to break the very people who worked hardest. Adrian decided then and there he would gather proof. That evening, as Claire finished her shift, Adrian followed her at a distance. She boarded an old bus, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Adrian quietly took a cab, telling the driver to follow. When the bus stopped in a poorer part of the city, Claire stepped off, clutching her worn bag. She walked quickly through cracked sidewalks until she reached the rundown apartment building. Adrian watched as she unlocked the door and disappeared inside. For a moment he considered following, but he knew it would cross a line. Instead, he sat in the cab, staring at the building, imagining the life she returned to every night. And then he saw it. Through the window he caught a glimpse of her. Claire was sitting on the floor, playing with a little boy. Her laughter, faint through the glass, lit up the dim apartment. Adrian's chest tightened. She wasn't just working for herself. She was fighting for him, for her son. The realization hit him like a wave. All her exhaustion, her desperation, her refusal to give up. It wasn't about survival. It was about love. And suddenly, Adrian knew this was no longer just about protecting an employee or fixing his company. It was about her. Back at his penthouse, Adrian made a plan. Step 1, watch. Learn. Gather proof of Dalton's cruelty. Step 2, protect Claire without her knowing who he really was. Step 3, when the time was right, reveal the truth. Not to overwhelm her, not to scare her away, but to show her she deserved more than scraps of kindness from a stranger. For now, he would stay in the shadows. But one thing was certain. Claire's fight was no longer hers alone. Adrian was in this with her, whether she knew it yet or not. The days that followed blurred into a cycle of exhaustion for Claire. She woke before dawn, prepared Jamie's breakfast, dropped him off at a neighbor's apartment for babysitting, and rushed to the restaurant. From there, it was endless trays, endless customers, and endless criticism from Dalton. Adrian was always watching, quietly, from the corner booth. He never revealed his real identity, never interfered openly. But every cruel word, every unfair demand, every tired glance from Claire cut into him deeper than he expected. And he was collecting evidence. He had a small camera disguised as a pen clipped to his shirt pocket. Every time Dalton barked abuse, every time he threatened an employee, every time he manipulated the staff, Adrian recorded it. Soon he would have enough to end this. But Dalton wasn't the only storm brewing. Life outside the restaurant was catching up with Claire, too. One Thursday evening, as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, Claire sat in the staff break room counting her tips. The bills were few, crumpled, barely enough to cover groceries. Her face fell when she realized what she was missing. Rent. She had 2 days to pay it. If she couldn't, she and Jamie would lose the tiny apartment they called home. Claire buried her face in her hands. Not again, she whispered. She had fallen behind before, but somehow always managed to scrape through. This time, though, the numbers didn't add up. When she finally walked out of the break room, she wore a smile again. Thin, fragile, but convincing enough to fool most. Not Adrian. He saw the truth in her eyes. That same night, trouble arrived. Jamie had been coughing for days, but Claire didn't have the money for a doctor. She gave him medicine from the pharmacy, hoping it would help. But when she returned home late that night, she found him burning with fever. "Mommy, it hurts," Jamie whimpered, his small hand clutching her sleeve. Claire panicked. She pressed a hand to his forehead. It was far too hot. She knew she couldn't ignore it. She needed a doctor, but emergency care was expensive, and she had almost nothing left. Her heart twisted as she wrapped him in a blanket and carried him outside. The bus ride to the nearest clinic felt endless. She held him tightly, whispering reassurances. "You'll be okay, baby. I promise. At the clinic, the nurse handed her a form. It's $120 for the consultation, ma'am. Claire's stomach dropped. $120. That was more than she had in her wallet. She stammered, "See, can I pay later? I just need him seen now." The nurse shook her head firmly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Payment first." Claire's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at Jamie, his flushed cheeks, his weak breathing. Desperation clawed at her chest. And then, a voice cut through the air. "I'll cover it." She turned sharply. Adrian stood there, his expression calm but his eyes intense. He pulled out his card and handed it to the nurse without hesitation. Claire's lips parted in shock. "Why you? What are you doing here?" Adrian offered a faint smile. "Maybe I was just in the right place at the right time." The nurse processed the payment, and within minutes, Jamie was taken to a doctor. Claire sat in the waiting area, trembling. She turned to Adrian, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said gently. "But I wanted to." Her eyes glistened. "Why? We barely know each other." Adrian hesitated. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. So instead he said, "Because sometimes people deserve help. Especially people who give everything and ask for nothing in return." Claire looked away, biting her lip. Nobody had ever said something like that to her before. An hour later, the doctor reassured them. "It's a viral infection. He'll be fine with rest and medication." Relief washed over Claire as she hugged Jamie tightly. When they returned to her apartment, Adrian walked them up the stairs. The building was old, the walls peeling, the hallway dimly lit. Claire unlocked her door, embarrassed for him to see the shabby space. "You didn't need to come all the way up," she said softly. Adrian shook his head. "I wanted to make sure you both got home safely." Inside, Jamie was already dozing off on the couch. Claire tucked him in with a blanket. Then she turned to Adrian, her hands twisting nervously. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "I'll pay you back somehow. It might take time, but—" "Claire," Adrian interrupted gently, "this isn't about money." Her breath caught at the way he said her name. "I don't want repayment," he continued. "I just want to see you and your son safe." Claire's chest tightened. No one had ever stood beside her like this. For so long, she had carried everything alone. And now, here was this stranger who kept appearing when she needed help most. For the first time in years, she felt the fragile spark of trust. But outside her apartment building, a darker reality was unfolding. Dalton sat in his car across the street, eyes narrowing as he watched Adrian leave the building. His jaw tightened. "That new waitress," he muttered. "No wonder she's so distracted. She's busy cozying up to some guy." He didn't recognize Adrian. To him, Adrian was just another customer, an ordinary man. But Dalton was wrong. Dead wrong. And soon, he was going to learn just how dangerous his mistake would be. That night, as Adrian drove back to his penthouse, his mind raced. Helping Claire at the clinic had been instinct, but it had also revealed something undeniable. He wasn't just interested in her story. He cared. Deeply. But he also knew the stakes were higher now. Dalton was watching her closely. And if Dalton tried to use Claire as his scapegoat, Adrian wouldn't forgive it. The time for watching was ending. The time for action was near. Ethan had spent sleepless nights after that evening in the kitchen when he saw Maria's tears. Something about the way she crumbled in silence haunted him. He had been pretending to be just another employee, but the truth, that he was the owner of the restaurant chain, a millionaire CEO, was burning at the edge of exposure. And still, he couldn't let go of the disguise. Not yet. Maria trusted him as a dishwasher. A quiet, unnoticed figure in the back who carried trays, scrubbed pots, and occasionally stayed after hours to fix the leaking faucet. If she knew who he really was, would she shut him out like everyone else did when they saw the money behind his name? He didn't want her admiration for his bank account. He wanted her to see him, the man, not the millionaire. That night, the restaurant closed late after an unusually busy Friday rush. The other waitresses hurried out, chatting about weekend plans, but Maria stayed behind. Ethan pretended to be fixing the mop bucket in the storage room while secretly waiting for her to pack her bag. But she didn't leave. Instead, she walked to her favorite booth, the one in the corner where the light barely reached, and sat down heavily, resting her head on the table. Her small backpack lay next to her, frayed at the edges. Ethan knew she had no real home. He'd pieced it together from her subtle slips. How she never talked about going home, how she sometimes washed up in the staff bathroom before shifts, how she was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Tonight, exhaustion got the better of her. Within minutes, she was asleep. Ethan froze, torn. He couldn't just leave her like that. But waking her might embarrass her, and Maria was fiercely proud of the dignity she still had left. So instead, he walked quietly to the kitchen, poured water into a clean glass, and set it gently on the table near her arm. He almost whispered her name, but stopped. Instead, he took out his phone and snapped a single photo. Not to exploit her, not to laugh, but because something in that moment struck him. A girl who had nothing, sleeping in the restaurant she worked herself to the bone for, and somehow she looked peaceful. The next morning, Maria woke with a start, realizing she had slept through the night. She found the glass of water and blinked, confused. Who? Then she noticed Ethan's jacket draped over her shoulders. She looked around, but Ethan was nowhere to be seen. The following day, the tension between them shifted. Maria glanced at Ethan more than once, a mixture of suspicion and gratitude in her eyes. Finally, during a short break, she asked softly, "Was it you? Last night?" Ethan dried his hands on a towel, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" She held up the jacket. "This, and the water." He looked at her directly then, his usual calm gaze breaking into something gentler. "You looked cold." Her lips trembled slightly, and for a second, Ethan thought she might cry again. Instead, she smiled. A small, fragile smile that looked like sunlight after rain. "Thank you." That weekend, the restaurant owner was supposed to make a surprise inspection. At least, that's what the staff believed. In reality, Ethan had planned it himself. He wanted to see how Maria handled pressure when the supposed CEO arrived. Of course, they didn't know the CEO was already there, disguised as a dishwasher. Maria worked twice as hard, barking playful orders at the kitchen, juggling trays with grace, checking every table twice. Ethan watched in quiet awe. She was a natural leader, but one who led with kindness instead of fear. Late that night, when the others had left, Ethan asked her to meet him on the rooftop. She hesitated, but curiosity won. The rooftop overlooked the city lights, stretching endlessly. Maria hugged her backpack, standing uncertainly by the edge, while Ethan leaned against the railing. "Why did you bring me up here?" she asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. The truth pressed against his chest. He wanted to tell her everything. That he wasn't just some dishwasher. That the inspection had been fake. That every paycheck she'd received was signed by his hand. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, he asked, "What do you dream about, Maria?" She blinked, startled. "Dream?" "Yes," Ethan said. "When you close your eyes and forget about all this, what do you see for yourself?" Maria looked down at her shoes. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "A little bakery, just mine, with a bell over the door and the smell of fresh bread in the morning. My mom used to bake before she passed, and I always thought, maybe someday, Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She looked out at the skyline, her eyes shining with determination. Ethan felt his throat tighten. A bakery. A simple, beautiful dream. And here he was, a man with resources that could make it real with a single phone call. Yet he was hiding behind a disguise. Someday, he repeated softly. She turned to him then, studying his face. What about you? What do you dream about, Ethan? He hesitated, and for the first time in years he told the truth. I dream about being seen, not for what I have, but for who I am. Their eyes locked, and in that quiet, star-filled night, something unspoken passed between them. But Maria didn't know the full truth yet, and Ethan knew the rooftop conversation was only the beginning. The storm was coming, the moment when his real identity would crash into her fragile trust. Would she forgive him, or would she walk away forever? Ethan wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stay silent much longer. The time was coming when the undercover CEO would have to reveal himself. And when that moment came, it would change both their lives forever. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of the restaurant office as Adrian sat silently at the desk, his hands folded, his eyes distant. Across from him sat Emily, her posture both anxious and defensive, as though preparing for the blow of a storm. The night before had been a whirlwind. Confessions, near disasters, and moments that seemed unreal even in memory. Now the air was charged with unspoken tension. Adrian finally broke the silence. Emily, he said softly, there's something I should have told you much earlier. Something about who I really am. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She forced a nervous laugh. What are you talking about? You already told me you were the owner. That was shocking enough. Don't tell me you've got more surprises up your sleeve. Adrian leaned forward, his voice serious but warm. I'm not just the owner of this restaurant. It's a part of a chain I built. A chain of hundreds of restaurants across several cities. I'm the founder and CEO of the entire corporation. Emily blinked, her mind struggling to process the words. For a moment she thought he was joking, but the sincerity in his eyes told her otherwise. You mean, she stammered, you're a millionaire? Like one of those business tycoons in magazines? Adrian nodded gently. Yes, I've been undercover here these past months. I wanted to see for myself what was happening in my restaurants. The truth I couldn't get from reports or polished board meetings. I came here to experience what my employees face, to find the soul of my business again. He paused, eyes softening as they locked with hers. And in the process, I found you. Emily sat frozen, her breath shallow. She thought of the countless conversations they'd had. His jokes, his willingness to clean floors alongside her, his empathy when she shared bits of her painful past. He hadn't acted like a millionaire. He had acted like family. Her throat tightened. So, all this time I was just a waitress talking to a CEO. No wonder you looked so comfortable taking charge during chaos. I should have guessed. But Adrian shook his head firmly. No, Emily. You weren't talking to a CEO. You were talking to me. The real me. Not the one with money. Not the one with titles. Just a man who was searching for meaning. You gave me that. The weight of the past. Emily's hands trembled in her lap. Her instinct was to retreat, to shield herself. Her past had taught her not to trust promises, not to believe in miracles. Adrian, she whispered, you don't understand. I've lived in shadows most of my life. My mom worked 3 jobs, my dad left when I was young. I know what it's like to starve, to wonder if you'll make rent, to hide from debt collectors. And now I feel like I've been dragged into a world I don't belong to. Your world. Adrian reached across the desk and took her hand gently, his touch grounding. Emily, listen to me. You belong in my world more than anyone else I've ever met. You taught me that success isn't about power or wealth. It's about compassion, resilience, and kindness. You've lived those values every single day. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she quickly blinked them back, embarrassed. What would people say, Adrian? A millionaire CEO with a waitress who barely makes minimum wage? They'd laugh. Adrian smiled softly. Let them laugh. I've been laughed at before, underestimated, even betrayed. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is, do you trust me enough to walk this path with me? The big decision. The following week, the restaurant buzzed with rumors. Word had spread. Adrian had revealed his identity to the staff. The mystery manager was actually the CEO himself. Some were shocked, others skeptical. But Emily noticed something. People worked harder with renewed pride, knowing the man at the top actually cared enough to stand in their shoes. Adrian began introducing changes immediately: better wages, health benefits, mentorship programs. He cited Emily as his inspiration. Her struggles a reflection of thousands of others who worked silently, unseen, to keep his empire alive. But amidst the professional whirlwind, Emily remained torn. Adrian's world offered stability, love, maybe even freedom from her struggles. Yet, the fear of losing herself, of becoming a shadow in his glittering universe, haunted her. One evening, after closing, Adrian found her again in the same booth where he had once discovered her sleeping. The memories hung thick in the air. "Emily," he said, sitting beside her, "I know you're scared, but I also know you're stronger than your fears. I don't want to rescue you. I want to walk beside you. Build something new together. The question is, will you let me?" Emily's answer. Emily stared at him, her chest rising and falling with the weight of the moment. She remembered the nights of hunger, the exhaustion of double shifts, the loneliness of a life without support. And then she remembered Adrian, the man who scrubbed dishes with her, who listened when she broke down, who saw beyond her uniform into her heart. Slowly, a smile broke through her tears. "You're right," she said. "I am scared, but I'm also tired of running from what I want. And Adrian," she paused, her voice trembling with both fear and hope, "what I want is you." Adrian's eyes lit with emotion. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in his arms, holding her as though she were the missing piece of his life. In that moment, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years: home. Not a place, not a paycheck, but a person. A future together. Months later, Emily walked into the restaurant, not as a waitress, but as a partner. Adrian had offered her a role she never imagined. Community liaison, helping design programs to support struggling employees and single parents. She used her past as a blueprint to create a better future for others. The staff adored her, not because she was with Adrian, but because she understood them. She had walked in their shoes. She was living proof that resilience could lead to transformation. Adrian and Emily often laughed about their first meeting. Him watching her asleep in a booth, her thinking he was just another tired manager. Little did they know, destiny had been quietly setting the stage. One evening, after a long day of work, Adrian surprised her with a small velvet box. "Emily," he said, his voice warm but steady. "We started this journey with secrets, struggles, and second chances. But now, I don't want to hide anything from you ever again. Will you marry me?" Emily gasped, her hands trembling as she looked at him. The world seemed to blur, leaving only his earnest eyes. Tears spilled as she whispered, "Yes." Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, a symbol not of wealth, but of promises kept. Around them, the restaurant staff who had become their family cheered and clapped, showering them with joy. Epilogue: the booth that changed everything. Years later, Emily would sometimes walk past that corner booth where it all began. She'd pause, smile, and remember the girl who once fell asleep there. Exhausted, hopeless, and unseen. That girl had no idea her life was about to change forever. And every time she looked at Adrian, her partner, her friend, her love, she knew one truth deep in her heart. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen in the most ordinary places. Sparkles. End of story. Sparkles.